Hola, ¿qué tal? Yo soy Juan Del. I wanted to make a follow-up video to the previous one on the Destiny Czochralski Cells. If you didn't catch it, tough luck, you'll never find it. Rather than read you the manual, I thought it might be better to show you it in practice, so we're gonna do a patch from scratch. First, I just want to start with the oscillators. I'm taking the sine waves out of each oscillators and going into the stereo mixer here. Okay, so yeah, it sounds pretty interesting with the voices panned, but can't really do much with it at this point. So rather than taking up 4 channels of the stereo mixer here, I want to take them into the dual phaser because each phaser has 2 inputs and it's the only other mixer on the panel. So we're going to use it to mix the oscillator voices. And then we're going to take those out back to the mixer, but we're going to go to channels 5 and 6 here. Alright, so now we have all 4 oscillators going into the dual phasers. But because we're using sine waves, there's not a lot of harmonics for to really hear the action of the phasers. So let's do some frequency modulation. I'm going to take the triangle wave output of this oscillator, modulate the frequency of this oscillator. And then let's do the same thing with the other pair of oscillators. So that sounds pretty cool, but let's try using the soft sync inputs of the oscillators. I think that'll give us some interesting textures too. Alright, don't make fun of my shitty drawings, okay? Sine, sine, everywhere, sine. Okay, so we have a fairly simple algorithm going here, where we are phase modulating oscillators B and D with the triangle waves of A and C, and then we are syncing the opposite operator with the square or pulse waves from oscillators B and D, and then we are listening to the sine waves going into the phasers. Clear as mud? Alright, it's a pretty interesting texture. So we have that going into the phasers. And now we can hear a lot more of that, of the phaser working. So we're not here to make a drone texture per se. So rather than taking it straight into the mixer, let's take it into the VCA, or 2 VCAs here. And we have 2 envelopes. So I'm going to take each envelope to one of the VCA CV inputs and then take the VCA outputs back into the stereo mixer. Alright, well, let's just move on to building up the patch a little more. So I'm going to start by patching the kick drum into the stereo mixer. Then I will take one of the drum voices into the stereo mixer, take your mom to the stereo mixer, and then take another drum voice to the stereo mixer, and another drum voice into the stereo mixer. Sounds great! Now we gotta start triggering things. I'm just gonna randomly patch out from the pulse network into the trigger inputs of the kick drum and drum voices. And then we'll just see what happens. So obviously we're not getting any rhythms right now, so we have to patch some things in. And you might have noticed I already have some small patch cables here. So this is one of the complex modulators It has a sine output, a square output. This one has pink noise, this one has white noise. There's a sample and hold in, a sample and hold clock in, the sample and hold out is the blue, and then you have the FM input, and they have attenuators. So basically how I have it patched now is it will generate a random stepped voltage in time with the rate of the LFO. And I'm going to do the same with this other complex modulator here. So we have two of them. Now to get some rhythms going, I need to figure my life out and take these into the pulse network. So I'm going to do sine wave out of one into one of the pulse network inputs. So we're already starting to get a pattern there. There we go. And then do the same thing with the other one. Same thing, sine wave out. Pretty simple pattern here. And then I'm going to take the let's say triangle wave to input A. All right, now we're dancing. Okay, we're still not hearing anything. So here's a scratchy, squelchy kick drum. There we go. All right, so there's our kick drum. I'm not getting anything on the snare because I have to put something into input D in order to get anything from the pulse outs up here. I'm going to take this other simple modulator, just the same thing that we have over here that we're using to go into input A of the pulse network. So this one I'm just going to kind of use as a slow modulator to slowly switch to the other outs of the pulse network. Alright, so there's our kick and snare. Bear with me, I know it sounds fairly basic right now. And then our hi-hat. Alright, and then our tom voice. And we're done! No, I'm just kidding. So let's work on making these voices sound a little more interesting. If you're not willing to experiment and try things, then you might be kind of disappointed with how basic things initially sound. It really rewards exploring, patching different things together. And every submodule or cell has a lot of inputs so that you can cross-patch things and get a lot of variety. So, for example, with the kick drum, let's patch the stepped random sample and hold out from this complex modulator into the velocity input of the kick drum. So now we're getting some variation in the amplitude and decay of the kick drum. Okay, so I'll leave the kick drum there for now. Let's figure out what we can do with the snare drum. So something I like to do to get a clap. So each of these drum cells that you can see here, here, and up here, they all have a rough pitch follower circuit. And I've found that if you patch the pink noise from this complex modulator into its tune, you can get a clap sound. Pretty cool. What about our hi-hat? I like to similarly modulate its frequency, but this time with one of the oscillators. Alright, and now our tom voice. So this is pretty rudimentary as it is. What if we were to take the wet-only signal of the second phaser and use that to modulate the frequency of the tom voice? What would happen? That's way cooler. Now I think then we can add in our oscillators, which are currently just droning because I haven't patched anything to pulse inputs yet. So let's do that. So now I want to start modulating the phaser so we can get these through zero oscillator voices, give them a little more movement. Each phaser has 3 modulation inputs, but only one of them has an attenuator. So I'm going to take the sine wave out of this simple LFO. In this patch currently, we have all 4 of the LFOs going into the pulse network, so there's a lot of rhythmic variety going on, and it still has a groove, but it doesn't have a short pattern that you can easily latch onto. And I guess the good thing about that is that it doesn't get boring, unless it just keeps going like this and you don't really do anything to modulate the voices. So now let's incorporate the joysticks, which are an important feature of it and really do a lot to be able to push the patch into different places and perform it a lot more. So let's start by adding a decay control for some of the voices, which is one of the ways I like to use it. So we'll go out of the X of the first joystick into the decay of the kick drum. So I'm going to go out of the Y output of this first joystick and into the decay of the 3 drum voices. So that way on one joystick, on one axis, I can control the decay of the kick drum, and then on the other axis, I'm going to go to the pitch of oscillator B in the kick drum complex oscillator. Alright, so now I have a performance control for the kick drum. Now, I want to add a performance control for the envelopes of the oscillators. So I'm going to take it into the decay inputs of the 2 envelopes. I'm sorry, the release of the 2 envelopes. So 2 of the oscillators have nothing going into their phase modulation inputs, so I'm going to use the 2 VCAs that I have left, along with a single joystick, with each axis being sent to the CV control for each VCA, and then use that to modulate the phase of the 2 oscillators that don't have that being modulated currently. And let's make it a cross modulation control. So I'll be taking, if I go back to this guy, this, to the phase modulation input of that oscillator, so we get cross feedback or cross modulation. Does that make sense? I have 2 joysticks left, so I'm going to use one to modulate the frequency of the 2 phasers with each axis. And now to modulate the frequency of all the oscillators, I'm going to take the sample and hold output from this complex LFO and take it into the input on the side. I still have 1 joystick left. I'm going to use the X-axis to control the decay of the drum voices and the Y-axis to control the Y input, which is the amount of noise in those voices. That's almost all of my cables. Alright. Now I'm just going to add a little reverb and see what happens. Muchas gracias por pasar rato conmigo. Hasta luego.